All right, let's try it again. Hi, welcome everybody. You are here for our presentation on Draft SEIS findings and question and answer session for the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. Thank you everybody who was able to make it tonight. We've got a lot of content to share, so we're going to jump into it right away. Today we have a presentation of findings followed by a question and answer session. And it's a Q&A only tonight. We will not be accepting comments on the document, but you are able to make those online and in other methods that we'll share later in the presentation, along with other opportunities to be engaged with the program. With that said, we're going to do introductions and then jump right into our presentation. And we will start with Ray.
Yeah, good evening. I'm Ray Mabey, Assistant Administrator for the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program.
Thanks, Ray. Chris.
Hi, Chris Regan, Environmental Manager.
Thanks, Chris. Shilpa.
Hello, Shilpa Mallam. I'm the Design Manager for IBR.
Thank you, Shilpa. Ryan.
Hello, Ryan LaBrouse, Transportation Planning Manager.
Thanks, Ryan. Angela.
Good afternoon, Angela Finley, Environmental Lead.
Thanks, Angela. And Hannah.
Hi everyone, Hannah Williams on the Public Affairs team.
Great, thanks Hannah. And I am David Gitlin, also a member of the Public Affairs team. Okay, so let's move ahead. Before we begin in earnest, I wanted to share that we have closed captions available in English and Spanish. Those are available both within Zoom and YouTube. If you're on YouTube, you're able to access those captionings there. And if you are on Zoom, you're able to access captioning via the toolbar on your screen. You should see a show captions feature in order to do that. We will have a dedicated question and answer time at the end of our presentation tonight. And you have a Q&A box available to you that you can enter questions in throughout the presentation. Because we have quite a bit of content to get through, we will be reserving all of those questions to the end of our time tonight. But if something is interesting to you, please do feel free to enter a question about the findings of the Draft SEIS, and we will answer as many questions as we can tonight. And with that said, I'm going to turn it over to you, Ray, for a welcome and program overview.
Well, thanks, David. If we get to the next slide, please. Once again, I'm Ray Mabey, Assistant Administrator. I'd like to welcome you all to this public briefing for the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program's Draft Supplemental Environmental Impact Statement, or SEIS. It was just recently published Friday, September 20th. And this evening, we'll discuss the proposed investments being studied in this draft SEIS and share information about the findings. The IBR program, with the support of program partners and community engagement, has developed investments to address issues that have been discussed in this region for over a quarter of a century. These issues remain unaddressed and continue to worsen. The investments being studied cover 5 miles of interstate from Victory Boulevard in Oregon up through and to SR 500 in Washington. And these include several points. One, replacement of the Columbia River and North Portland Harbor bridges with modern seismically resilient structures, multimodal structures as well. Improvement to multi-use path with connections to local established paths. Extension of light rail 1.9 miles from Expo in Oregon into Vancouver with 3 new stations and up to 2 park and rides. And this is complemented by bus on shoulder from Vancouver to downtown Portland with a bus on shoulder through the program area. It also includes improvements to 7 interchanges with a half interchange on Hayden Island. And then the bridges will have 3 through lanes with 1 auxiliary lane in each direction. That's being studied, and also variable rate tolling to help fund the program as well as provide traffic demand management. Some of these elements have design options which create bookends that are being studied. that we'll talk about later. But what I just described is the build alternative. We're looking at two alternatives, build and no build. The draft supplemental environmental impact statement also studies the no build alternative, which is the scenario where none of these investments are being pursued. Next slide, please. So tonight, we're going to do 4 key things. We're going to provide information about this document and give you a high-level overview of the NEPA, or National Environmental Policy Act, and how it plays into this draft SEIS. We'll talk about the high-level overview of the findings. That's a fairly complex document with lots of information. So we're going to give you a high overview of those findings, which include benefits and impacts. And then we'll talk about how the 60-day public comment period will work, how to best engage, how to get, where those opportunities lie, so you can find the time and space that's right for you to be able to comment. And then at the end, as David mentioned earlier, we'll be providing some time for questions and answers, but we won't be taking comments in this session. Next slide, please. Now, the key things that have been discussed over the last quarter century, as I mentioned, were refined and defined in the SEIS for the previous effort of Columbia River crossing, and were reaffirmed for IBR. And those include 6 key purpose and need statements that you see here. Safety, because of the accident rates due to the conditions that we have on this roadway of narrow lanes, no shoulders, poor sight distances. We see impaired freight movement because of the congestion we have in the corridor. That's due to the conditions as well as safety. The impaired freight is due to congestion. So we have congestion conditions where we have congestion conditions in over 10 hours a day during peak periods. And then we have earthquake vulnerability in this area. We have vulnerable bridges that are at risk of collapse in a Cascadia subduction zone earthquake. We have inadequate bike and pedestrian paths that need to be upgraded. And we have limited public transportation options because the buses that run on the highway there are in the same conditions of all the rest of traffic. So these are the key things that we're trying to solve, and we need to solve all of them, not just 1 or 2, as we develop the investments that you're going to hear about tonight. Next slide, please. Next, I'd like to turn over to our environmental manager, Chris Regan.
Thanks, Ray. And my task tonight is to walk through what exactly is the National Environmental Policy Act, how has it created the foundation for us, and how are we moving forward with it? So with that, next slide. So the National Environmental Policy Act was one of the first planning laws in federal statute, and it has about over a 50-year time frame of practice. The law is an action-forcing law. It requires federal agencies to assess and disclose environmental effects of proposed actions before they make decisions. And it ensures that the agencies consider public comments as part of that decision-making. Because NEPA is so old, it has become an umbrella law. And so as federal governments or federal agencies are complying with laws and regulations, they wrap it into the National Environmental Policy Act. So for example, with environment includes Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, a number of policies and executive orders on noise and vibration, as well as the Endangered Species Act. It includes the National Historic Preservation Act, which focuses on historic and protected areas, archaeological resources, and tribal consultations. And it also deals with a number of laws that affect communities, like residential and commercial displacements through the Uniform Relocation Act, as well as the executive order on environmental justice. The documentation of the National Environmental Policy Act at its height is an environmental impact statement. And that is what we're talking about tonight. So next slide, please. If you've been around, you've heard us say that we are not starting from scratch with the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. Instead, we're building on past work. The Interstate Bridge Replacement Program continues the work of the Columbia River Crossing Project that began in the early 2000s. The environmental impact statement for CRC went through a scoping period. It created a draft and a final environmental impact statement. And through the draft, through the scoping project and into the draft, it evaluated a no-build alternative against 4 build alternatives. There were also a number of alternatives that were dismissed during CRC. And again, the EIS focused on the no-build plus the 4. In 2011, our federal agencies issued a record of decision, which identified a selected alternative. That selected alternative was revised a couple of times into the Columbia River Crossing Locally Preferred Alternative, or CRC LPA. The CRC project, unfortunately, was shelved in 2014 due to a lack of regional consensus. But through action of the Oregon and Washington governors, they decided that this was too important to leave on the shelf. So in 2021, they pulled it off the shelf. We re-engaged Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration as the federal co-leads, and we started looking into the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. Next slide. So as we started looking into the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program, we assessed the transportation challenges that were defined in the CRC project and recognized that they continued to exist and they remained unresolved. So the purpose and need that Ray described was actually the original purpose and need for the CRC, and it remains valid for the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. The range of alternatives that were evaluated in CRC were still valid and remained technically and economically feasible. But since 2013, there was recognition that there were a number of changes within the program area, including physical, environment, and community priorities and regulations. And therefore, in 2021, Federal Highways and Federal Transit Administration agreed that to do a NEPA reevaluation, assess the extent of those changes, and determined that a supplemental should be prepared to identify and disclose impacts and ways to avoid, minimize, and mitigate those impacts with the changes in conditions that had occurred. Next slide. So as Ray said, the purpose and need that was defined in CRC continues to be valid today. And our findings are looking at how the locally preferred alternative best resolves these and also affects the environment. So we're looking at safety, impaired freight movement, congestion, earthquake vulnerability, inadequate bike and pedestrian paths, and limited public transportation. Next. So as we move forward and we talk about the findings, there's a number of terms that are important to understand. The modified locally preferred alternative is a set of corridor-wide multimodal improvements to fulfill the program's stated purpose and need. Within the modified locally preferred alternative, there are design options, and those design options are refinements that are considered for specific project components, and they represent a range of potential options for the design of that specific component. Now, the modified locally preferred alternative and the different design options are compared against the no-build alternative, which means in the future, none of the modified LPA components would be constructed. But planned projects that are independent from IBR would have to go forward. And of course, we're considering these multiple design options to allow for analysis and disclosure of a range of potential impacts and benefits, make sure that our decision makers understand the variety of paths to considering how to fulfill the purpose and need, and ways to maximize benefits while minimizing harm. And with that, I think, we're going to look at findings within 3 general technical areas. Within transportation, we'll consider findings for transportation, air quality, aviation, greenhouse gas, navigation, noise and vibration. Within the community area, we're going to look at cultural resources, economics, environmental justice, land use and neighborhood impacts, property acquisitions, public services. And in the environment, climate change, visual quality, water quality, and impacts to wetlands and waters. So now I think with that, I'm going to hand it over to Shilpa.
Hey, Shilpa, you ready to take over?
Yes. It's my screen. Yes. Thank you, Chris. Hello, Shilpa Mallan, Design Manager, and I'm going to talk about what the modified locally preferred alternative is and what we studied in the draft SEIS. So some of these elements Ray mentioned earlier, and the slide here lists the elements of the modified locally preferred alternative. And that includes the improving active transportation facilities and connections throughout the 5-mile corridor, extending light rail transit from Expo Station in Oregon to Evergreen Boulevard in Vancouver, including bus and shoulder facilities. The light rail extension comes with 3 new light rail stations, one in Hayden Island, one at the Vancouver waterfront, and one at Evergreen Station, Evergreen Boulevard. And of course, it includes replacing the bridges over the Columbia River and the North Portland Harbor, modifications to the 7 interchanges that we have on I-5, and I'll go through in the next few slides the locations of the interchanges. We are looking at 3 through lanes in each direction on I-5 with at least 1 aux lane in each direction, and aux lane is a ramp-to-ramp connection. And also includes variable rate tolling for motorists using the river crossing, both as a demand management and financing tool. And as Chris mentioned, we'll be comparing this alternative to no-build alternative. And we're also, the analysis that we're conducting is in the future for the year 2045. So within the modified locally preferred alternative, or MLPA, we also have a few design options that we're studying. We have different design options for the bridge configuration, for the C Street ramps in Vancouver, the aux lanes, park and ride locations, and I-5 alignment, which we'll go through in detail. This is a graphical representation of what we just went through. This is the 5-mile corridor starting over here. This is the Victory Boulevard interchange, Marine Drive interchange, Hayden Island interchange, SR14 interchange, Mill Plain, 4th Lane, and SR500. Those are the 7 interchanges. A little bit about tolling, which is also part of the MLPA. The tolling will be electronic tolling, no toll booths, and no need to stop on the freeway. We're looking at the timing. We're still working on the timing where it's anticipated to start when construction starts as early as 2026. And once the new bridge is built, the toll will be shifted to the new bridge. It will be variable rate tolling. It's going to be know before you go. So there's a set schedule. There's no surprises when people get to the bridge. The toll rates that we studied in the draft SEIS have a range from $1.50 to $3.15 and $25. And that's what we use to analyze the findings in the draft SEIS. But the actual rates for the toll would be set by the Oregon and Washington Transportation Commissions. They are meeting right now. They'll do the rate setting and also any exemptions or discounts. And these are ongoing conversations, and we hope to have the rates and policies set about 6 to 8 months before tolling begins, probably in 2026. So now I'm going to talk about the investments, the MLPA, and what's included in the investments. This is going to be a high-level summary, but we do have videos and maps online to talk about each of these movements that we have available along with the draft SEIS. So I'm going to start at the south end of the program area in Oregon and keep moving north. We're at the south end, that's Victory Boulevard interchange, and this is the Marine Drive area. So we're looking at interchange improvements at Marine Drive as well as Hayden Island and some at Victory Boulevard. We are looking at light rail extension here in orange. That's Expo Center, Expo Station today, extension moving north into Vancouver with a new station on Hayden Island in this area. We're also looking at active transportation connections on all the local roadways and across the interchange for people who want to walk and bike. There's also a path leading them to the main river bridge from this area. There's at There is change from Hayden Island, like Chris mentioned, what's changed in the last 10 years since CRC. What we're looking at on Hayden Island is a partial interchange, meaning we have ramps to and from Vancouver and on Hayden Island. And then the ramps from Hayden Island to and from the south will be using this new arterial bridge to access Marine Drive and Point South. The new arterial bridge is also a local connection between Hayden Island and North Portland. Today, their only access is through the interstate, so this will provide an alternative access. And that bridge is where the active transportation pathway would also be located. Another addition is the Tomahawk Island Drive, a local connection, east-west connection, which is a new connection on Hayden Island, is also part of what we're studying in the draft SEIS. Moving north, this continuation, we saw Hayden Island area in the previous slide. Moving on to the bridge itself, the new bridge is going to be located just west of the existing bridge, and then join back to I-5 north in Vancouver, and then south here in Hayden Island. We do have 3 options we're looking at for the bridge, and I'll go through them. Next slides. For context, here's the existing interstate bridge, the typical cross sections. We have 3 lanes each direction, no shoulders, very narrow sidewalks, and as you can see, we also have very narrow lanes on the bridge. Also about the number of stops, it's a lift span today, and we have an average of 275 stops each year, including the stops that are required for the bridge maintenance. One of the configurations that we're looking at for the bridge is the double deck fixed span configuration. The fixed span options are the ones that don't have a lift span or don't have a stop sign on I-5. So double level, we have automobiles on the first level, northbound and southbound. And the second level going northbound, we have the shared use path for walking, biking, and rolling. And the second level on the southbound, we have light rail transits. We also have bus on shoulder for all options on the inside shoulder. The second option is again a fixed span, and it's a single level fixed span. Single level meaning all nodes are on a single level, opposed to what we saw on the previous slide. Again, active transportation is along with the northbound traffic on the east side, and light rail is along southbound traffic on the west side. The couple of visualizations that we have on the right side are various options of like bridge types that we could be looking at with the single level fixed span option. The third option we're looking at is a movable span, and working with the Coast Guard, and that we're looking at a movable span as part of the single level option. So the modes are still on the same level, except the pier in the middle would have a lift span for river users. Moving north, this is the downtown Vancouver area. This area encompasses the SR14 interchange here, as well as the C Street ramps to and from downtown Vancouver. It shows light rail extension, the waterfront station at the waterfront, and extending to the light rail terminus for this program area at Evergreen Station near Evergreen Boulevard. It's also a placeholder for the community connector in this area, in the Evergreen Boulevard area. And we have a few options here, design options in the draft SEIS, starting with the C Street options. And for the C Street options, and the next option would be the Western Shift option. Context for that is, as part of NEPA, we're trying to balance the impacts that we may see with any of the investments that we're looking at. So balancing all the impacts to the various resources that Chris went through, all the reports that we include in the draft SEIS. So one of the things we're looking at is impacts to downtown, versus like, again, impacts to anything on the east side, which is Fort Vancouver, as an example, trying to see how these options would impact them and what the trade-offs would be between the impacts. The C Street one of the options is to include C Street ramps as they are today, the northbound off-ramp to C Street, and then southbound on-ramp onto I-5. But then there would be an option study to understand what would happen if we don't have these ramps. The traffic would have to go up to Mill Plain, and all the analysis and what that means is included in the draft SEIS. The second option is just north of the C Street interchange, south of Mill Plain. In this area, we are looking at a slight shift of the main line alignment and to understand the various impacts in this area. And the third option we have in downtown Vancouver area is the park and ride locations. We are looking at understanding the need for park and ride for the program along with the transit stations. And this figure shows 5 locations, 3 locations in the waterfront area shown in this hatched areas, and 2 locations near Evergreen Boulevard as possible locations for park and rides to help support the stations. Moving north, we have the 2 interchanges, Mill Plain and 4th Plain. Again, to help with operations and safety, there are slight changes. There are changes to how we access each of the interchanges. For example, the exit for 4th Plain will be back here closer to Mill Plain. So it's separating out through traffic with exiting traffic ahead of time and with the collector distributor road to help with operations and safety. Again, throughout the entire 5-mile corridor, we have active transportation going east-west to make sure we have those connections for people living and working east and west of the interstate. The final north portion of the program area, the SR 500 area, we have a similar collector distributor roadway helping separate the traffic coming southbound on I-5. Exiting 4th Plain, which is just off the screen, and also entering I-5 from 500 here. So we have some braided ramps helping with the operation and safety here. The 5th option that we are looking at is aux lanes. We have an option that looks at 1 aux lane across the bridge and another option that looks at 2 aux lanes across the bridge. So aux lanes are ramp-to-ramp connectors. We in the program area have 7 interchanges in the 5 miles. It's not typical to have that many interchanges in such a short distance. So these ramps help with the traffic entering and exiting the freeway and help with operations and safety. And to talk about the next slides and the findings, I'm going to hand it over to Brian Krause, Transportation Lead.
Thanks, Shilpa. Brian Krause, Transportation Planning Lead. I'm going to cover some of the transportation findings that are in the draft SEIS. Next slide, please. So first thing, I'll cover some existing safety conditions. So over the 5-year period, 2015 to 2019, we had almost 1,800 crashes on I-5, the ramps and the ramp intersections within the IBR program area. During that 5-year period, we had 7 fatal crashes and 17 serious injury crashes. The short merging, diverging, weaving areas, limited shoulders, congested conditions, and bridge lifts all contribute to the high number of crashes in the IBR program area. Next slide. Next, I'm going to talk about 2045. As Shilpa and Chris mentioned, 2045 is kind of our future analysis period. So in 2045, the no-build alternative is forecast to increase crashes 28% over current conditions. And the modified LPA and design options, either 1 aux or 2 aux or other design options that Shilpa just went through, will reduce crashes between 13% and 17% compared to the no-build alternative due to geometric changes, including interchange improvements, auxiliary lanes that Shilpa pointed out, CD roadways, lane widths, and full shoulders. Next slide. Next, I'm going to cover average daily person trips on the I-5 Columbia River crossing. This graphic breaks down the people throughput by mode. So you can see we have vehicles, freight, transit, and active transportation modal information on here. So daily person throughput is forecast increase about 30% in 2045 no build compared to existing conditions. The modified LPA and the design options, either 1 aux or 2 aux, will increase person throughput in 2045 while reducing the vehicle miles traveled on I-5. The person throughput with the modified LPA will increase by about 4% with the MLPA, modified LPA, or the design options. This increase in daily person throughput with modified LPA and options compared to no build is due to the increase in transit, as we've talked about the extension of light rail from Expo to Evergreen Boulevard, as well as the express bus enhancements and the bus on shoulder improvements, and all the active transportation improvements that Shilpa quickly went through, as well as the variable rate tolling in the program area. Next slide. Next, I'm going to cover the vehicle crossings on the I-5 bridge. So in existing conditions, we have about 143,000 on an average weekday cross, both northbound and southbound combined on the I-5 bridge. And that's going to increase about 26% into 2045 for the no-build condition. The modified LPA and design options will reduce that about 3% in vehicles as a comparison to the no-build. Next slide. Next, I'm going to cover travel times. So travel times are shown here for a specific origin and destination pair. They're going from the I-5, I-205 interchange near Salmon Creek to the I-5, I-405 interchange in North Portland. We're summarizing here is the 2-hour peak travel times. Travel times for the peak and the off-peak will decrease compared to the no-build. This graphic is showing the critical peak period, peak direction. So southbound AM is the critical peak for southbound, and then northbound PM is the critical peak for northbound traffic. And that's kind of shown here on the graphic. The southbound travel times during the AM peak period will reduce from 58 minutes in the no build by about 7% or 4 minutes for the MLPA with 1 auxiliary lane, and then another 4 minutes to about 50 minutes for that specific origin destination pair for the MLPA with 2 auxiliary lanes. Next, I'm going to talk about the northbound travel time. So the northbound travel time for the no build for that same pair from the I-5, I-405 split in North Portland up to the I-5, I-205 interchange near Salmon Creek is 42 minutes. That will reduce about 40% to about 26 minutes with the modified LPA. And then with the modified LPA with 2 auxiliary lane design option, that will reduce about 67% to about 14 minutes in total travel time. Decrease in travel time is attributable to the IBR program components, including the auxiliary lanes, the collector distributor, roadways, interchange, and freeway geometric improvements, the transit improvements for both LRT and express bus, and the variable rate tolling. Next slide. Next, I'm going to talk about the hours of congestion at the I-5 Columbia River bridges. The hours of congestion is defined as speeds under 45 miles an hour. And we're kind of summarizing it for both northbound and southbound individually in this graphic. As you can see in the graphic, we have about 30 hours forecast for northbound and southbound combined in 2045. As Ray mentioned, kind of in the purpose and need statement today, we have about 10 hours in 2019 conditions. This is going to increase out to 30 hours by 2045 for the no-build condition. For the LPA and modified LPA, one option, so the southbound daily congestion is going to decrease from 16 hours to about 4.75 or 4.5 hours with the modified LPA and design options. And this is going to focus mostly in the morning period. Today, the conditions, again, southbound is in the morning, PM's in the evening, northbound is when the congestion is. As you can tell from the 16 and 14 hours, that's an all-day period is when that congestion is. So the southbound is being reduced to just be kind of the morning. So there's midday improvements as well. And then in the similar condition for the northbound, it's reducing from 14 hours to 9 hours with the MLPA with 1 aux, and then down to about 6 hours with the MLPA with 2 aux. The big deal and the difference here with those is the duration and the length of that congestion. So for the northbound congestion with the 1 aux, you're backing up to about the I-5, I-405 split still with the 1 aux, and then the MLPA with 2 auxiliary lanes, it's much reduced and only backs up to about the Hayden Island Marine Drive area. Next slide. Next, I'm going to cover transit travel times. We covered summarized transit travel times for all modes of transit. These transit travel times include the 10 minutes of walking on either end of their trip. So each travel time here is stated from downtown Vancouver to the Pioneer Courthouse Square in downtown Portland. The modified LPA, the design options for light rail, the travel time is 47 minutes in both directions. And then for the southbound AM Express bus, the modified LPA and design options, the travel time is 59 minutes. That's shown there on orange for that. And it's compared to about 48 minutes for the no build. While the southbound bottleneck, the reasons for this is there's a southbound bottleneck south of the program area that is near the I-5, I-405 interchange. So that it still exists even with the program improvements. So you'll still have some downstream congestion south of the project area. Big difference for the northbound, though. You can see the travel times reduced from 67 minutes for the no build to about 45 minutes or 33 minutes, depending on which design option you're doing. And the big thing here to think about is the round trip travel time. So the southbound AM and the northbound PM travel time for the modified LPA, 1 aux and design option of the 2 aux is about 10 to 20% faster than the no build condition. Next slide. This is my last slide. I'm going to cover daily transit ridership and then passenger miles of transit facilities. So the daily transit ridership increases almost 100% under the modified LPA and design options compared to the no build. You can see the data there showing the no build is forecast about almost 15,000 transit riders crossing the Columbia River in 2045 versus the modified LPA is almost 29,000 transit riders in 2045. Next, I'm going to talk about passenger miles. The chart on the right, the number of passenger miles is the distance the people travel on transit. Excuse me, it's kind of a transit vehicle miles of travel. The number of passenger miles occurring within transit exclusive right-of-way is one metric used to calculate kind of transit reliability. The extension of the yellow line from Expo is highlighted as part of the program, as well as the express bus improvements are all included in this. So the modified LPA and design options increase passenger miles in the exclusive transit right-of-way almost over 200% compared to the no build. And that was my last slide, so I think I'll transition to Angela next.
Great, thank you, Ryan. Hi, Angela Finley, environmental lead for the IBR program. I'm going to continue talking about some of the findings in the draft supplemental environmental impact statement. As Chris had showed earlier, we grouped the findings into 3 categories. We had the transportation related findings, the community findings, and the environmental findings. All of this information is provided in much more detail in Chapter 3 of the supplemental environmental impact statement. So we encourage you to take a look. It's lengthy, and so I will continue to go over some of the highlights. So I'm going to move into the community findings next. If we go to the next slide, we'll start off with navigation. Certainly navigation on the Columbia River is a critical mode of transportation, particularly for our large freight shipments. With the modified locally preferred alternative, with any of the bridge configurations being studied for the main stem of the Columbia River, we're going to be increasing safety and maneuverability for vessels using the river due to reduction in the number of bridge piers that are in the water. Today, there's 9 pairs of bridge piers in the water. That will be reduced to 6. And with that reduction comes wider openings or horizontal navigation clearance to 400 feet with any of the new proposed bridge configurations. I'll talk a little bit more on a future slide about switching the location of the primary navigation channel with one of the barge channels that's currently on the river. There is, as I mentioned, with improvements or wider clearances for navigation, that also helps vessels take a straighter path to underneath the Columbia River bridges, as well as they line up to pass through the BNSF railway bridge that is just downstream of the Interstate Bridge. There are a few adverse impacts. Is a slight reduction in the distance between the Interstate Bridge and the BNSF railway bridge, and that's because the new bridges would be constructed just to the west or downstream of the existing bridge. And so that's a little bit closer to the BNSF railway bridge, so that does provide a shorter distance between the 2 bridges that most vessels must transit through. The fixed span bridges would reduce the vertical navigation clearance to a maximum of 116 feet, whereas the movable span would retain the maximum vertical clearance of 178 feet that is there today with the lift span. There's also what we call a turning basin, an area where large ships can turn around between the two bridges, between the BNSF Railway Bridge and the Interstate Bridge, which is called the Upper Vancouver Turning Basin. That would be relocated just slightly to the west by about 300 feet, 350 feet. If we go to the next slide, we're going to take a look. This is all the bridge configurations superimposed onto one graphic. And so what you're doing is you are looking on your left is Hayden Island, on your right is Vancouver. And so your view is kind of like if you're in the water, looking toward the Interstate Bridge. I will start with the black kind of hatched line. It's the most curvy of the lines that are on the map. That is the profile or the view of the current interstate bridges, the pair of bridges that are there today. The double deck fixed span bridge is the dark blue. You can see the upper deck very clearly. It's the highest line. The lower deck is a little bit harder to see because it's pretty much at the same level as the single level fixed span bridges. And then in the reddish magenta color, almost at the same height is the single level movable bridge. And you can see that the distance between the bridge piers in all configurations are 400 feet apart. It provides space for 3 navigation channels, which are there today and would be retained there in the future, providing wider openings for all of those channels compared to what there is today, as well as higher clearances, vertical clearances than what there is today when the existing bridge is in its closed position. If we go to the next slide, I can show you a little bit more about the relocation of some of the navigation channels. So there are 3 navigation channels today. In the upper graphic with the yellow line is our primary navigation channel. That is the channel where the current lift span is. It's the primary navigation channel because it provides the highest clearance, vertical clearance for vessels. So that's where the larger ships will pass through. The barge channel in the light blue and the alternate barge channel in the green provide other pathways for ships that don't need to use or vessels that don't need to use a bridge lift to pass under the interstate bridge to use. That is where many of the tug, tow, and barge configurations typically go upstream and downstream. However, sometimes they will use the primary navigation channel in inclement weather because it provides the straightest line between the interstate bridge and the BNSF railway bridge, which you see on the left-hand side. What we propose with the Interstate Bridge Replacement project in the lower graphic is you can see the yellow and the blue line have switched locations. The primary navigation channel is now more in the center it is in the center of the 3 navigation channel. The green channel stays about in the same, and the other 2 swap locations. We have run some ship simulations, and which is a modeling effort run by actual tug and ship pilots to test the safety of these channels. And because of the wider horizontal clearance, they can actually position to pass under the bridge and position for the BNSF railway bridge almost easier than they can today. And so there is a net benefit toward navigation safety. And if you want to see more information, you can check out chapter 3.2 for more information on navigation. We'll move next to property acquisitions and potential displacements. This understandably is a sensitive topic. Unfortunately, that This project, like many projects, do require acquisition of additional lands. We are looking at acquiring approximately 47 acres throughout the 5-mile corridor in order to construct the modified LPA. Depending on the specific design options, there is additional acreages. Sometimes it's fairly small, like 0.1 or 0.2 acres. Some of the transit areas may require, the park and ride locations could acquire up to 3 acres. What that translates in terms of displacements of residential units or businesses or other public use sites. You can see on this list, we're looking at 43 residential units being displaced, 36 businesses and 1 public use site. It's pretty much the same for all the design options with the exception of the I-5 westward shift in downtown Vancouver. That would require displacing 3 additional businesses and 1 apartment complex that comprises 36 residential units. We understand the impact that acquisitions and displacements have on the residents of these homes, of these units, as well as the business owners. If we go to the next slide, we just want to emphasize that where we are in the process right now is at a conceptual level of design. And we have tried to err on the side of maybe looking at a large footprint. And as the design advances, the program will continue to work to minimize impacts to property to the extent that we can avoid and reduce that number of acreage and the number of residential business displacements. That is definitely the program's goal. And as I mentioned, we are in conceptual design. We are not in final design. That comes much later on down the process of implementing the program. And so there is plenty of opportunity to look for options to reduce those impacts. The discussions with property owners individually impacted will really begin in earnest after we complete the environmental process. But we can certainly provide property owners opportunities to talk with our real estate agents to learn more about the program and the opportunities and the process by which acquisitions, displacements, relocations are handled. We go to the next slide, please. We'll move into economic activity impacts and benefits as a result of the program. We are looking at, as Ryan had mentioned when he was talking about some of the improvements to congestion reduction, reduced delay for vehicles on the highway, that has a direct impact or correlation to our freight mobility. As many of you know who travel this section of I-5, there's a lot of freight being shipped by truck on the highway. And so any benefits to reduce congestion benefits freight mobility as well. It helps people who are either traveling by any mode, whether it be by vehicle, transit, or active transportation, being able to have additional facilities, being able to move from one place to another more quickly than they can today and in the no-build situation. There are some impacts to the economic activity with the acquisition of acreage. It does mean that we are taking property out of the tax revenue system. There are, with the association of business displacements, we are looking at approximately 600 jobs being affected with those displaced businesses, which may be relocated. That is to be determined down the road, but acknowledging that there are those impacts to levels of jobs. However, on the flip side, one thing to keep in mind is during construction, we will have an influx in the number of jobs directly related to construction, as well as indirect jobs, those who are supplying materials or services to the employees and the businesses associated with construction. And generally what we found, for every $1 billion spent on construction, that equates to approximately 5,500, an increase in 5,500 jobs directly related to the construction effort, as well as over 10,000 indirect jobs. So it is an influx of economic opportunities during construction. If we move to the next slide, we're going to switch and talk a little bit about environmental justice. Environmental justice is a term that came about from an executive order, a presidential executive order that was implemented in 1994. And this requires all federal agencies, when they propose a project, to look at the impact specifically to two subsections of two special populations. One is on minority populations as well as low-income households. And so as part of this program, we have specifically looked at impacts to those two populations, in addition, and compared them to impacts to the overall population across all of our resource areas. The impacts and benefits that we have found that would affect environmental justice populations that are similar to those for the overall general population is increased access to high capacity transit, active transportation, reductions in vehicle travel time, increased access to jobs through faster travel times, improved air quality, and increased traffic and noise during construction. Specifically, areas that environmental justice populations may feel a disproportionate high and adverse impact compared to the general population includes the impact of tolling on low-income households. Some of the residential and business displacements that could occur are in higher areas of EJ populations. And as well as some of our minority populations may experience adverse effects to cultural resources that are important to them. Similar to environmental justice, equity looks at, again, a group of targeted populations. For our program, we have been looking at, in addition to minority and low-income households, we've also been looking at other populations, our populations of disabled persons, elder persons, youth, tribal governments. I'm probably not going to remember to name all of them, but I certainly encourage you to look at chapter 3.5 for more detail on this. And what we looked at, our analysis for equity looked at what is the impact on travel time due to increased access to high capacity transit. That could be the light rail transit system, as well as the express bus on shoulder transit and active transportation. We saw that they received reductions in travel time because of those alternate modes of transportation. That also leads to increased access to jobs due to those faster travel times. We understand, similar to the environmental justice, that some of the displacements would impact some of our equity populations, maybe more adversely than the general population. And similar to environmental justice, the tolling, transportation costs, and construction-related impacts. Noise and vibration is also thoroughly studied in the supplemental environmental impact statement. What we are showing here in this graphic is just one map of many along the corridor. This one happens to be I-5 at Mill Plain in Vancouver. And this is showing kind of many of the dots you see on the map are areas where we have measured and modeled the impacts of noise onto residential areas or others, what we call sensitive receptors, could be schools, parks, hotels, in an effort to understand what the noise impacts would be and whether it makes sense to install sound walls as mitigation. In the no-build situation, in the no-build alternative, we are showing that there are 215 what we call receptors or sites that could be houses or schools, as I mentioned, 215 in the no-build that are affected by noise related to the highway. And the modified LPA would reduce that to 198 with some of our mitigation that's implemented. There's a potential for 10 noise walls being looked at in Washington and 1 in Oregon. With respect to transit, and this is primarily with the proposed light rail transit system, there would be about 12 receptors that would be affected at a moderate level from noise, and another 12 that would, and 12 residences in 1 theater that would experience vibration impacts associated with the light rail system. Visual impacts. This can be maybe a little bit more interesting than a map of sound walls. We have a lot of graphics on this slide. On the left-hand side is looking at 3 different situations from the viewpoint from Hayden Island, just upriver of the bridge, looking to the west. And you see on the top left, that is obviously today's current condition of what the Interstate Bridge looks like from that vantage point. The middle left is a rendering of what a double-deck fixed span bridge would look like from the same viewpoint. And then at the bottom left is a single level bridge. That one happens to show the lift towers associated with the movable span. The single level fixed span bridge would look the same minus the lift towers. On the right-hand side, you can see that you're on the Interstate Bridge heading north. And then in the middle, that would be, again, the double-deck bridge being on the upper deck where there is vehicular traffic. You can see bus on shoulder operating there on the median. And then on the lower right-hand side is the single-level bridge right at the area where the lift span towers would be on the movable span. Next slide. This is another set of renderings. From this point, your position as at Fort Vancouver National Historic Site, looking to the southwest, and in the very background, where the red arrows are pointing, I'm looking at the upper left-hand photo first. You can see the towers of the Interstate Bridge, and if you look really closely, you can see a couple of the trusses as well. If you move to the bottom left, that is a rendering of the double deck. So the towers go away. The bridge is a little bit higher, and you can see it a little bit more prominently than you can with today's bridge. If you move over to the right-hand side, these are both renderings of the movable span bridge. The upper right is the movable span bridge in the closed position, and the lower right is the movable span bridge with the lift section raised. I encourage you to check out the draft supplemental EIS. There are more renderings in the document as well as in the visual impact assessment technical report. Parks and recreation, we definitely have a fair amount of parks within the project vicinity. One of the largest ones is the Fort Vancouver National Park, National Historic Site. In Oregon, we have East Delta Park, and there's a few others that are smattered throughout the project area. Parks and trails are important resources that we, of course, look at like many of the others, and we try to minimize the impact and acquisition of park lands. We're looking at just over 1 acre total of park and recreation resources acquisitions. We would be reconstructing or permanently realigning approximately 5,800 linear feet of trails. As well, in addition to additional sidewalk and shared use pathways throughout the corridor to improve access to parks and recreation facilities, as well as to transit stations. And the last item in the community category of resources that I'll introduce you to tonight is our cultural resources. Some really cool photographs of the original interstate bridge that was built. This is the north span that was built originally. I believe that in the lower picture is the grand opening, with many people excited to walk across the bridge when it was opened. This is just part of our cultural resource analysis, is looking at historic properties throughout the corridor. We have looked at hundreds of resources. We have identified that there are approximately 12 archaeological sites of importance within our study area. You see the term APE, that stands for our area of potential effects. For our cultural resources, we have about 12 archaeological sites of importance, and we have 12 what we call historic resources. That's kind of what we term our above ground resources, historic buildings, bridges, and those type of architectural structures.
Angela, just a quick time check.
Thank
We're
you.
about 6:30 now. And I'd love to leave a full half an hour for Q&A. So if
Okay.
folks are able to stay an extra 10 minutes or so till 7:40, or sorry, where are we on time? Until 7:10. That way we'll be able to get a full 30 minutes. And just ask Angela, you and Hannah to
Speed it up.
Speed it up just a little bit. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. We just got a few slides left here. Environmental climate change is certainly that's important to the community. We've looked at both analyzing impacts to climate change, whether it be greenhouse gas emissions or resiliency to changes in climate over the long term. So in the draft SEIS, you will find some calculations for emissions. One of the metrics we look at is vehicle miles traveled. And so we have some information in the EIS for both the no-build alternative and the modified LPA, as well as talking about some of the design improvements to improve resilience to any change in climate. Next slide. Water quality. Right now, most of the roadways, including the mainline I-5, is not treated for stormwater runoff. So one of the major improvements, in addition to the transportation improvements, is collecting stormwater and capturing it, detaining it, treating it before it moves into either our groundwater or surface waters like the Columbia River. We'd be looking at treating nearly 200 acres of impervious surface that is currently untreated. That would be treated as a result of the program. Ecosystems, we certainly have a host of aquatic and terrestrial resources, have a lot of regulatory conditions that are that we're jumping through, especially with constructing a bridge in the Columbia River. Our aquatic species are important, and we will be looking at minimizing impacts, and there will be mitigation and habitat restoration as part of that effort to minimize the overall net impact of the program on the environment. Temporary construction impacts. A lot of what I've talked about already today is some of our permanent impacts, but we also know that during construction, there are a lot of impacts, particularly related to noise, dust in the air, delays on the roadways, detours for local streets, sidewalks, trails. With that is also access to businesses, In addition to permanent acquisitions, there will be some acquisition, what we call temporary construction easements. And then during construction, the visual quality is also affected. Lots more detail in the environmental impact document to understand that more. And lastly, but not least, as we continue to move forward, we are always looking to move through our avoidance, if at all possible. When we can't avoid, we minimize. And if we have adverse effects, we are looking for mitigation measures. With that, I will pass the presentation over to Hannah.
Thanks, Angela. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for spending time with us this evening. Now you've been hearing from us, and now it's time for us to tell you about how we really want to hear from you. Can I get the next slide, please? So now is the time to take what you've learned tonight, go on our website, go back into the document, and give us your feedback. We want to hear about what you think about the benefits, the impacts, design options, technical analysis. So please do that. We want to hear from you, from your friends, from your family. So please share this. There's some important information that's on here, so I'm going to go through it, but don't worry if you don't catch all of this. It is on our website, so you'll be able to get it. We really want to hear your comments. So there are ways that you can do that to submit a formal comment, and I will have that on the next slide so you can see exactly how to do that. I do want to read through this so you know that comments submitted through social media and informal conversations, those are not going to be recorded as formal comments. So really encouraging to have formal comments going through the official channels for commenting, and I'll share that on the next slide. And then also too, we want to make sure that you know that you can include attachments in your comments. So attachments to emails must be specifically referenced in the comment text, including specific citations to page numbers and passages from the attachment. So we really want to know why you're attaching this. What is your comment? What is the feedback? So really, please make it very clear to us what feedback you're trying to provide and where we need to be looking, what the connection is to the analysis. Really connect all the dots for us so that we make sure that we get your feedback right. And also, I want to call to your attention this last bullet here, that all audio and video attachments, we need them to be transcribed or submitted via the Draft SEIS voicemail line. Wonderful. Can I get the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so the Draft SEIS is available. We want you to dig in, read it. There is a lot of information that is on our website, and there are a few ways that you can view this document. So you can go online and view it. We also have hard copies available at a few locations in Oregon and in Washington. We're also offering office hours where you can come and ask your questions. That's a great opportunity to really dig in and chat with an expert, as well as here at our public briefings here. That's why I'm going to wrap this up quickly so that we can hear from you and you can ask your questions. Can I get the next slide, please? Great. So how to comment. We want to make sure that you're going through those official channels so we can record your comments as part of this process. So there's a few ways that you can do that now until November 18th. So you can use the web form, and that's available on our website. You can email a comment to draftseis@interstatebridge.org. You can send us a comment through the mail to our office at 500 Broadway, Suite 200, Vancouver, Washington, 98660. You can also leave us a voicemail at 866-IBR-SEIS. That's 427-7347. You can also leave your comments at a virtual or in-person public hearing. And again, we have all this information on our website, so don't worry if you don't have all these dates. and links in front of you. Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. And as just sharing this slide again for questions and answers, if you haven't entered your question yet, you're welcome to do so through the Q&A box. We have quite a few that have been submitted already, so I'm going to begin going through those in just a second. I also wanted to note that several people submitted comments or submitted questions ahead of time in the Zoom registration. So we'll be pulling from those two sources, the questions submitted ahead of time and the questions submitted during this meeting. And last, I just want to emphasize something that Hannah brought up, which is office hours. So please do take advantage of that if we don't get to your question. And you want to get into the details. Office hours are a great opportunity to speak with a technical member of the team. So with that said, I'm going to stop sharing and we'll jump right into the questions. The first question is, what is the location of the proposed bridge? And Shilpa, I believe you're prepared to answer that.
Thanks, David. So the proposed location of the new bridge is going to be just west of the existing bridge. It's downstream of it and parallel to the existing bridge.
Thank you, Shilpa. Next question, and this may be for Ryan. What do you mean exactly by interchanges?
Shilpa, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I can take this one too. Thanks, Ryan. So interchanges are the connections that we have between, say, a local roadway and a freeway in our program area. They can also be between freeways and the freeways. They're the system of ramps, the on-ramp and off-ramp that we have to I-5 in the program area, to, like, say, Marine Drive. We have a system of ramps that take us to I-5 northbound and I-5 southbound. Similarly, if you're on I-5 northbound or I-5 southbound, you have ramps that take us to Marine Drive. So that whole area, the system of ramps is part of the change.
Thank you, Shilpa. Another question for you. Are you consulting people who don't use vehicles as their primary forms of transit, especially those with disabilities?
So we have had multiple conversations with people, people that walk, people who bike, and we had various, we had fairs and festivals, but we also had meetings with groups on the Portland side as well as the Vancouver side. And we continue to do so. We'll continue to have those discussions and take input and feedback and see how we can incorporate that into our design now as well as moving forward. Let's see if anybody else wants to add to that.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add. We have many organizations that that serve people that are walking and biking and serve people experiencing a disability that are on our notifications list, and also connected with our different partners. Earlier in the summer, it was really neat to see community groups in the walking and biking space organize a walk to talk about the program. So there are many different communities that don't drive, that could or could not be experiencing a disability, that are engaged with the project, and we're really grateful for that.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Shilpa. Next question, Shilpa, I believe this is for you as well, and it's about parking requirements. Have parking requirements been reevaluated after the implementation of Vancouver's BRT system?
Well, thanks, David. So we are working with C-Tran. C-Tran is one of the owners on the program. And yes, one thing that has changed between CRC and now has been the BRT system from C-Tran. So working with them, the terminus that we have with light rail, how the buses interact, not just at the terminal, but at other areas, and what that means to the program. Ryan, Do you have
Yeah,
anything to add
I'm
to
just gonna
that?
jump into, yeah, this
Yes.
also includes future planning for future routes for BRT, not just the existing routes. So the mill plan and the other ones that are planned for C-Tran are included in the future forecasting, as Shilp was pointing out. So.
Okay, thank you. Next question is about narrowing the design options and bridge types. So the specific question is, will the final SEIS narrow down the design options and bridge types to fewer choices, or will all available options continue to be considered until the record of decision?
I'll start this, but also want to introduce Casey Lyles, our delivery manager, who's also going to help with this and some other questions. Casey, if you want to do quick introduction.
Good evening, Casey Lyles. I'm the delivery manager for the IBR program.
So we have different options in the draft SEIS, and we are looking for feedback and analysis in the draft SEIS to identify an alternative in the final SEIS. That's what we're planning on doing. There are two things in the question of the bridge types. We have bridge configuration as the option, not the bridge types. The bridge configuration is the double level bridge, the single bridge, and the lift span. That is what we're trying to narrow down in the final SEIS. The bridge type, meaning whether it's a truss or a steel or an extra nose bridge, that's what we call bridge type, and that is not something that we're identifying in the draft SEIS or final SEIS at this time. Casey, anything to add to that?
I would just add that we're looking to get the public feedback through our comment process on the bridge configuration. If you do have comments or desires on bridge type, we're certainly welcome to hear any of those as well.
Thank you, Casey. Angela, this may be a question for you about visuals, or Shilpa, maybe you. I think, Angela, you introduced visuals earlier in the visual quality slide. Will we have additional visualizations available of the program improvements?
Yes, we will. We have many in the environmental impact statement, as well as the visual quality technical report that you can also access via our website. In addition, we'll be bringing additional visualizations, even some video visualizations of the corridor to our public in-person meetings on October 15th and October 17th.
Thank you, Angela. Next question is about acquisition. So the specific question is, when will you start acquiring homes along the freeway and Shumway? But perhaps we can talk more globally about property and the next steps for that, Angela.
Yeah, the actual acquisition process doesn't start until we get a little bit further with advanced design, and those property impacts that we show today may change a little bit. Definitely trying to reduce those. After the environmental impact statement, the final supplemental environmental impact statement is published, and we move forward with what we call a record of decision. That's the endpoint, if you will, of the National Environmental Policy Act. Then the right-of-way acquisition process can begin. But I think it's important to keep in mind that this is such a large program. It will be built in phases, not all at once, and property acquisition will also be phased. And so depending on which phases go first, the property acquisition will be prioritized to match the construction phasing. The Shumway area is in the northern part of the corridor, and so depending on when that part of the program is constructed, the right-of-way would happen prior to that right-of-way acquisition.
Great, thanks, Angela. And Shilpa, Casey, staying on the this theme of acquisition or easements, can you explain what a subsurface easement means?
Yeah, I'll start with that. So A subsurface easement is essentially a right underground under someone's property to install, in the cases that's shown in our DSEIS, are the supports for nearby walls. That underground right has to be acquired from the property owner. The intent of that underground easement is to not impact the use of that property that's existing. In the case of the DSEIS that's published now, we don't have all of the details of what the property may have on its in its use. As an example, it may have a basement that we don't know about, and so through further discussions in working through the final SEIS and into design, we'll discover, working with those properties on an individual basis, what that current use is, what the requirements are, and how we can work with those properties to, again, either avoid or minimize the impacts to those properties.
Thank you, Casey. Next question is about bike garages. Shilpa, maybe you can answer this. Are there plans for secured bike garages for multimodal commuters?
Going to Ryan, can you chime in on what we've looked at in the draft SEIS for this one, please?
Yes, those details will be kind of continued on into the park and rides, and there's transit stations that will be many amenities that will be worked out for the details. So right now it's a pretty general level, kind of talking about multimodal access to the transit stations and the parking kind of garages, but those information will be kind of worked out further in details, and secure bike parking, other features like that are kind of come along a little later in the design.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan. Another question about the volume of designs. So the specific question is, so many possible designs, how will the final one be chosen and who will be doing that?
David, I can take that. I think part of this was answered earlier by Shilpa and Casey as we were talking about bridge design. But the NEPA process is set up to provide a draft that has difference in options, that shows contrasts, to collect information from individuals who maybe have more details that we should consider as we refine the action that's going forward. So the final is going to take all of the comments that we've received, consider how that might modify our locally preferred alternative, and the goal is to get down to a single locally preferred alternative as we move forward to the record of decision. And so it is the NEPA process to get rid of or to narrow it down to the selected alternative so everybody knows how we're moving forward, and that's what it goes into the federal record of decision.
Thank you, Chris. Shilpa, a question about incline. What is the degree of incline for non-vehicle users?
So for all non-vehicle users, we will be following the ADA standards, guidelines that are set, and that followed by the both states and cities, depending on the location too.
Thank you, Shilpa. Pardon me as I'm just looking through and making sure I've captured everything. Appreciate your patience. Let's go to this next question about the properties impacted. So the question is, can you share the map again of the properties impacted, but larger so we can see the details better? Angela, can you speak to that one?
Sure. Yes, there's only so much you can fit on a slide. So that was more to give folks a taste that information is available in the draft SEIS. And I would encourage you also to look, there's a tab for our technical reports. There is a specific technical report called acquisitions. And in that technical report, you can see more graphics zoomed in at a different scale, so that you can get a better sense of those acquisitions, and certainly take advantage of coming to our in-person events or office hours to talk more more one-on-one if you have specific questions about property that you may own.
Thank you, Angela. Question about shoulder buses. So is there a reason to have shoulder buses as opposed to buses on the rails? There's an example of this on the Orange Line between 3rd and Lincoln and South Waterfront stops. So looking to Ryan or Shilpa to answer.
So
I'll
I
jump in,
can,
Shilpa. Go ahead, Shilpa.
go ahead.
I was going to say, so there's different routing, different transit routings. The team worked with the transit owners, C-Tran and TriMet, kind of looked at the transit markets and what is needed. So there's the express bus enhancements, those express bus routes. So kind of from Salmon Creek, that kind of just travel down the I-5 core. So they would get the benefit of the shoulder use within the program area. The light rail system is kind of having different uses and different, it comes into downtown Vancouver, has stops and stations. So that is planned and has a different kind of purpose and market for it. So there were complementary kind of solutions there determined and wanted by the owners. And so that's kind of what's been pushed forward as part of the program improvements. Did I miss anything, Shilpa?
Thanks.
Okay, there were a couple of questions in the pre-registration about property acquisition, specific property acquisitions. So Angela or Shilpa, maybe you can repeat kind of the recommendations for that. But one of those questions is what work is proposed for North Jansen Drive and what are the next steps for that?
I think so. For North Jansen Drive, we are looking at realigning North Jansen Drive to improve the east-west connectivity on the island, and also looking at the graphics, you can see that that is also where the ramps from Vancouver are going to be connecting to Jansen Drive for access. So those are some of the improvements that we're looking at in Jansen Drive at this time.
Thank you.
And Angela, we want to talk about the right of way that you mentioned earlier.
Sure. I mean, there is definitely a process that the program will be going through that's consistent with the Uniform Relocation Act. And we certainly encourage specific property impacts that you may be concerned about to come in and take advantage of those office hours, or the at the in-person events on October 15th and 17th. We will have our real estate team there at those meetings for property owners to have those discussions and learn more about the process.
Thank you, Angela. A question about light rail. So will light rail on the main bridge be installed during construction of the main bridge or via transit packages? Casey, Shilpa, that may be a question for you.
I'll start with that. The program is envisioned to be delivered in a lot of different construction packages. And it's not entirely decided on what work is going into each package. However, the bridge is one that's understood to be installing the bridge itself. And when light rail comes through, it's important to have a length of construction to be able to work on that's like construction. So I think I'll lean in and say that the rail itself won't be installed by the bridge package itself. It would be a separate construction package. It may be combined with other transit elements, but not with the bridge itself.
Thank you, Casey. And there's just one last question in the queue. Chris Regan, I'll put this to you. And I'm also noting that it's 7 o'clock. So I said that we would extend 10 minutes, but if there aren't any more questions, we can wrap after this one. So Chris, the question is that there had been, in a prior meeting last week, Greg said that there's an online search function for the draft SEIS. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. Again, our goal here is to make things as easy as possible for individuals to find what they're looking for. And we would love to demonstrate that. We're probably not tonight. As Angela said, there are opportunities at the upcoming public hearings on the 15th and the 17th. We also have office hours. More than happy to help people understand how to use that. So we can demonstrate, again, one of the functions that we feel will help people cut through all of the pages there and get to the specific questions they're looking to answer.
Okay. One final question here about interest rates. So the person said that interest rates are high, like 7%. Mine was 4% when I got my mortgage. Will we be compensated to help mitigate the difference?
We hear that we don't have that answer like specific to each area, but we're going to follow the process that like Angela laid out in Draft SEIS and the regulations that we have. So how to have more discussions if you want to have set up the office hours for the specific location. Anything to add?
Yeah, maybe I can jump on that one too, Shilpa. The property values and acquisitions are being handled by through the standards of the Uniform Act for right-of-way acquisitions. And as they work with property values, they need to give take appraisals and then look at fair market value. I'm not a right-of-way specialist, but I would imagine that fair market value would include what is happening with current interest rates. But we can have people available in office hours to answer more specific questions with that expertise.
Yeah. Thank you, Ray. And as we've brought up office hours several times tonight, I just wanted to put up that slide so you can see the link to access office hours. It's www.interstatebridge.org/calendar. So if you have further questions about specifics, we all do encourage you to take advantage of that opportunity. And so with that said, we are at the close of our time tonight. Thank you everybody for your time and attention joining us. Thank you for the great questions. And we hope that you're able to attend a future IBR Draft SEIS event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.